Like most elections, the 1996 races did not begin in that year. They began in 1992, when Bill Clinton was first elected over incumbent President George Bush. The campaigns accelerated with the 1994 congressional elections. Republicans, under the leadership of Newt Gingrich, promised a contract with America, pledging to enact 10 very popular conservative programs. The electorate responded and elected a Republican majority in both the U.S. House and Senate. But a Republican Congress and a Democratic president led to government gridlock. The budget crisis of 1994 led to a shutdown of all but vital government services for nearly a month, until a compromise could be negotiated between the president and the Congress. The country blamed the Congress, not the president, for the crisis. Clinton was seen as fighting for principle and protecting Medicare, which the Republicans wanted to cut. Clinton said he was balancing the budget in a way that defends our values and protects Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment. Hello, I'm Belinda Bremner, and this is the story of the 1996 elections. It began as many as 4 years before the actual vote and got into high gear at the conclusion of the 1994 midterm elections. It takes at least $500,000 and the support of many individuals and organizations to run a successful congressional campaign. It can easily cost $10 million to run for the Senate and a great deal more to run for president. Those resources cannot be raised overnight. The election year, however, officially begins with the Iowa Party caucuses, the New Hampshire primary, followed by the elections of delegates to the party national conventions in the remaining states. And so, we'll pick up our story from there. By the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary, Bill Clinton had emerged as the only Democratic candidate for president. He was the incumbent, and unlike 1968, when the Democratic Party was split between the supporters of incumbent President Lyndon Johnson's Vietnam policies and those who opposed them, there was no division in the Democratic Party this time. However, there was a contention for the Republican nomination with 9 candidates entering the Iowa caucuses. There were still 7 by the time of the New Hampshire primary. While Robert Dole, Senate Majority Leader, was the favorite, several Republican candidates had stronger ideological programs they wanted to push. Moreover, there were those who thought that Dole couldn't win in November against the Democrats. 2 of the challengers to Dole in the debate held before the Iowa Republican Party caucuses were Lamar Alexander, former Tennessee governor and Secretary of Education, and Pat Buchanan, former Republican presidential speechwriter and favorite of the conservatives.
If all we talk about is the budget, this country is going to be cheated out of a very important conversation. We're electing the first president of the next century. And if all we talk about is what's going on in Congress instead of schools, and how to get a bill out of a subcommittee instead of rebuilding families, if all we talk about is Washington, D.C. instead of neighborhoods, if that's all the vision that we have, Bill Clinton's going to be elected. And we're going to have a Democratic Congress and a speaker named Gephardt. So I want to get this debate out of Washington, beyond the budget. We need new Republican leadership. We need to talk about the real world. And we need to do one more thing. This is the Republican primary, a time for plain talking and a family discussion. We need to say, with respect to Senator Dole, that it may be your turn, but it's not your revolution. It's not your time. It's time we moved outside Washington, and it's time we moved on.
And what I think this campaign is going to decide is what conservatism means in America in the post-war era. As someone who was with Barry Goldwater in the 1960s and that defeat, let me tell you what it means to me and what it doesn't mean. I reject a conservatism that knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. I reject a conservatism that celebrates corporate profits when those profits are made by sending the jobs of our working people overseas. I want an America, and I'm going to lead as a president. We're going to restore America's lost national sovereignty that's been surrendered to global institutions around the world, because my conservatism is one of faith, family, and country. There will be no more of these unfair trade deals. There that send those American jobs overseas to Mexico, China, Taiwan. None of that anymore. And American troops, we're not putting them in faraway places where no vital interest of ours is engaged, whether it's Haiti, Bosnia, Macedonia, the Golan Heights. And I hope my colleagues will stop the next disposition of American troops there. Conservatism means to me standing for those values. I'm in favor of small businesses and family farms, not factory farms. I'm in favor of supporting those institutions of community and family, which I think are the fabric of society. And if it's not, I don't worship, my friends, at the altar of efficiency. I don't worship at the marketplace. I believe that what we have to stand for is those policies, ideas, and ideals which will support and sustain what is really crucial to making us a great and good country. And that's the values of faith, family, and freedom. That's why I want to be Mr. Conservative, then Mr. Republican, then Mr. President.
So I think I'm sensitive to the needs of a lot of people. We're talking about a President of the United States. We're talking about someone who will exert moral leadership, someone who will be sensitive to the needs of some people who need help. At the same time, somebody who believes in the future and downsizing government and making things work with tax cuts for families and balancing the budget over 7 years with real numbers, working with the Congress, reaching out sometimes to Democrats as you have to do. No, Bob Dole is not a polarizer. Bob Dole provides leadership. Bob Dole delivers. Bob Dole tries to get things done.
Dole did not win a clear-cut victory in New Hampshire or the other early primary and caucus states. While some candidates withdrew from the race after losing early primaries, several contenders continued to fight for the Republican Party nomination.
People in New Hampshire, they voted their hopes, not their fears, their aspirations and dreams. And they stood up to the negativists from inside the Beltway.
By March, the Republican primary battle was over, with many states holding primaries on what were called Junior Tuesday and Super Tuesday. Bob Dole emerged with enough electoral votes to win the Republican nomination.
Thank you, Colorado. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Connecticut. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Maine. Thank you, Maryland. Thank you, Massachusetts. Thank you, Rhode Island. And thank you, Vermont.
Robert Dole was damaged by attacks from his fellow Republicans during the primary campaigns. Pat Buchanan had undermined his credibility with conservatives. Steve Forbes had shown that Dole was not offering imaginative programs such as the flat tax plan. Worst of all, Dole had been bloodied by $25 million in negative advertising from Steve Forbes' campaign. It was also beginning to be clear that Ross Perot would enter the presidential race as he had in 1992, and that he might well take votes away from the Republican candidate. Perot's Reform Party would not select a nominee until its summer convention, but by March, the 1996 presidential election contestants were becoming clear. President Clinton would be running against Senator Dole and Ross Perot. By studying public opinion polls, we can track American voter opinion and so follow the election more closely. And you can bet the candidates as well as the media were doing so. The Pew Research Center for the People and the Press asked voters who they would vote for if the presidential election were held today. The polls indicated that as of the last week in March, in a three-way race, Clinton would win against Dole and Perot with 44% of the vote. The most unusual aspect of the 1996 contest is that the pattern didn't change much in the months of political battle from March to the November election, as these voter opinion responses show. The results in the November 8th election were much the same. Clinton won re-election with 50% of the vote. Dole garnered 41%, and Perot trailed with only 9%. During the campaign, Dole and the Republican Party labored mightily to try to change public opinion. In particular, Robert Dole took 3 bold steps to reverse his image with the public and gain voter support in the weeks before the Republican National Convention. On May 15th, he resigned his position as Senate Majority Leader to devote full time to the campaign and to get rid of his image as a Washington insider.
So today I announce that I will forego the privileges, not only the office of the Majority Leader, but of the United States Senate itself, from which I resign effective on or before June 11th.
Next, candidate Dole made a very popular choice as his running mate. He selected former Congressman Jack Kemp. He then followed that announcement a few days later with a proposed 15% tax cut that would affect every American household.
Now we're going to do this. First, a 15% across-the-board tax cut, fully phased in 3 years, that will repeal the Clinton tax hike on the middle class.
While these actions temporarily boosted his poll ratings, they weren't enough to swing the tide. That brings us to the battle of the party conventions. In earlier days in American history, the National Party conventions were exciting events in which the nominees were actually chosen. But party reforms since the 1960s have allowed party voters to determine the nominees by primary election of delegates pledged to the candidates. The selection of presidential and vice presidential nominees at the convention is now merely a foregone conclusion. The conventions themselves have become merely a showcase for the party's platforms and candidates broadcast to an audience of millions of Americans. First came the Republican Convention in July in San Diego. In their made-for-TV scripted convention, the Republicans tried to portray themselves as the party of growth, hope, families, and leadership. They contrasted themselves to an elitist Democratic Party of leaders who had never grown up and who trusted government to solve all our problems. Dole promised to build a bridge to an older, better America.
Age has its advantages. Let me be the bridge to an America that only the unknowing call myth. Let me be the bridge to a time of tranquility, faith, and confidence in action. And to those who say it was never so, that America has not been better, I say you're wrong. And I know because I was there, and I have seen it, and I remember.
The Democratic Convention in Chicago in August contrasted sharply with the earlier GOP convention. The Democrats showcased social concerns with Sarah and Jim Brady and Christopher Reeve.
In 1991, both houses of Congress passed the Brady bill. Oh, Jim and I were elated. But the gun lobby and the threat of a presidential veto again killed the Brady bill. We quickly learned the value of having a president who is really committed to putting an end to gun violence. And 4 years ago, the American people elected just such a president.
And I believe, and so does this administration, in the most important principle. The most important principle that FDR taught us. America does not let its needy citizens fend for themselves.
The Democrats' theme was the future, and they continually used the image of building a bridge to the future, not the past.
I love and revere the rich and proud history of America. And I am determined to take our best traditions into the future. But with all respect, we do not need to build a bridge to the past. We need to build a bridge to the future, and that is what I commit to you to do.
After the conventions, the presidential campaigns continued on the airwaves, as well as by more traditional means of voter contact. With more and better ads, Clinton was generally credited with winning the paid media wars.
4 years ago, I ran for president at a time of high unemployment and rising frustration. Vice President Gore and I wanted to turn our country around by restoring our basic bargain: opportunity for all, responsibility from all, and an American community where everybody has a role to play. I wanted a government that is smaller and less bureaucratic, to give people the tools they need to make the most of their own lives.
The campaigns also involved nationally televised presidential and vice presidential debates. Unfortunately for Dole, he was unable to make the millions of Americans watching change their minds and vote for him. In that sense, he lost the debates.
But this is a very liberal administration. This is the administration that gave you the big tax cut. This administration that tried to take over health care and impose a governmental system. This is the administration that fought regulatory reform that was putting a lot of small businessmen and small businesswomen out of business. This administration that fought the balanced budget amendment and vetoed a balanced budget and vetoed welfare reform twice. And the list goes on and on and on.
We are better off than we were 4 years ago. Let's keep it going. We cut the deficit by 60%. Now let's balance the budget and protect Medicare, Medicaid, education, and the environment. We cut taxes for 15 million working Americans. Now let's pass the tax cuts for education and child rearing, help with medical emergencies and buying a home. We passed family and medical leave. Now let's expand it so more people can succeed as parents and in the workforce. We passed 100,000 police, the assault weapons ban, the Brady Bill. Now let's keep going by finishing the work of putting the police on the street and tackling juvenile gangs. We passed welfare reform. Now let's move 1 million people from welfare to work. And most important, let's make education our highest priority so that every 8-year-old will be able to read, every 12-year-old can log on to the internet, every 18-year-old can go to college. We can build that bridge to the 21st century, and I look forward to discussing exactly how we're going to do it.
The 1996 elections were not only about the election of the president. All of the seats in the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate seats were contested. Gubernatorial elections were held in 11 states, and the elections for state legislature and county positions were held in all 50 states. When the 1996 election season began, there was talk of a conservative realignment, completing the rightward swing started by the Republican takeover of Congress and the contract with America. The Republicans wanted to win back the presidency, to continue their control of Congress, and to win most state elections. On the other hand, since the Republicans only had a 35-vote majority in the House of Representatives, the Democrats could again gain control of the House if they won an additional 18 seats in 1996. But many congressional races were preordained. More than 90% of the incumbent congressmen were reelected, regardless of their party affiliations. So the control of Congress turned on a few key races. One such race was in the 5th District of Illinois, which spans across the city of Chicago's wealthy and working-class neighborhoods and into its middle-class suburbs. Republican Congressman Michael Flanagan in 1992 had defeated scandal-ridden Democrat Dan Rostenkowski. Now he was being challenged by a strong, young Democrat, Rod Blagojevich. Just as there were real differences between President Bill Clinton and challengers Robert Dole and Ross Perot, there were major differences between Republican Congressman Michael Flanagan and his Democratic challenger Rod Blagojevich. Blagojevich would successfully convince the voters in the 5th District that Congressman Flanagan was merely a pawn of the unpopular Speaker of the House, Congressman Newt Gingrich. Here is Congressman Blagojevich's conclusion as to the meaning of the 1996 elections.
I think I won in 1996 because my opponent and I offer two distinctly different views on the proper role of government. While I believe that government has a role to play in connection with helping working kids and kids in general get a college education, my opponent voted to cut student loan programs. While I believe the government has a fundamental responsibility to protect our environment, my opponent voted to cut funding for the Environmental Protection Agency and voted to dismantle the Clean Air and Clean Water Act. While I believe that government has a role to play in regulating the dissemination of weapons in our society, my opponent voted to repeal the ban on assault weapons. While I believe the federal government ought to help local governments hire more police and put more police in our streets. My opponent voted to cut funding that would have hired a significant number of new police officers in our neighborhoods. So I think the differences between my opponent and I on issues like that, issues that relate not only to the personal security of people in our communities, but also the economic security of working families. I think on those issues, this campaign was decided. The 1996 election was about two different views of government. And I think the American people decided that they wanted a reasonable, common-sense approach to government that helps communities and helps people pursue the American dream.
Congressman Blagojevich said that his election was about voters choosing a moderate but positive role for government. Clinton said that the outcome of the 1996 elections meant that we should put politics aside and get on with the practical job of moving the country forward.
Today, the American people have spoken. They have affirmed our course. They have told us to go forward. America has told every one of us, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, loud and clear, it is time to put politics aside, join together, and get the job done for America's future.
Yet, when the election was over, nothing seemed to have changed. Clinton was still president. While the Democrats made gains in both the Congress and in state elections, the Republicans still controlled the Congress. Perot's Reform Party lost the most credibility, declining from 19% of the vote in 1992 to 9% in 1996. Some new Democrats, like Rod Blagojevich of Chicago, won seats in the House of Representatives. But the Republicans maintained majority control of both houses of Congress and re-elected Newt Gingrich as Speaker. The balance of power between the two parties remained virtually unchanged. The voters themselves were less positive about the election than those who were elected. After an increase in voting in the 1992 election, voter turnout dropped below 50% in 1996. Exit polls and public opinion polls showed greater alienation and dissatisfaction with government, the candidates, and the media's coverage of the election. The voters cared deeply about issues like crime, education, and health care, but the candidates didn't offer policy alternatives that the voters could embrace. So the voters were turned off by the 1996 election. Among those who voted least often were America's youth. Less than 20% of those 18 to 24 years of age cast a vote at their polling place. Listen to what students at the University of Illinois at Chicago have to say about the 1996 election.
My name is Samira Day, and I voted for the incumbent President Clinton in the last presidential election. I believe a lot of students didn't vote, in this presidential election because there weren't any issues that were really relevant or, concerned them, such as in 1968 they had the Democratic National Convention, which was the issue of war, which affected younger people. So therefore, I feel that in order for people to really come out and vote, they probably need a major issue that will directly affect them.
My name is Kathy Burchard, and I voted for Bob Dole in the last election. I'm 23, and I think a lot of people in my age group didn't vote in the last election because of either confusion or mistrust of the government or complexity of the issues. I think that the media confuses the issues, and with such an overwhelming state of affairs, I think that people just choose to keep their distance from the political arena altogether.
My name is Mohammed Crescent. The reason I didn't vote in the election is because I didn't really think the candidates really cared about any of the minorities or any of the small people. I think all they felt was, after they get elected, they could do whatever they want with office, and we didn't really have a say. And I also didn't think they really came out and talked to us as the people or as the teenagers. They didn't really say anything about us. They just, argued amongst themselves, amongst the other candidates. I don't think they felt anything about us.
So, what was the meaning of the 1996 elections? For the most part, Americans re-elected incumbents, whether they were president, congressmen, or local government officials. Women played a bigger role in determining the outcome of this election than perhaps any previous one. A post-election survey of actual voters showed that women supported Clinton 53% of the time, Dole 34%, and Perot 6%. women's votes appear to have provided the Democrats with their margin of victory. While it is true that the Democrats made some gains, the existing balance of power between the parties was maintained. Despite the Republicans' early hopes, the 1996 election clearly did not produce a conservative realignment. In fact, the 1996 election produced a de-alignment. More and more Americans, even though they were less likely to support Ross Perot and his Reform Party, remained dissatisfied with the candidates and programs offered by the two major parties. A majority of the electorate said no to both parties and stayed home on Election Day. Some political scientists say that voters are simply satisfied with their own economic and social situation. But a better explanation seems to be that this election reveals a volatile, unstable electorate. Voters are looking for new political alternatives as they cross the bridge into the 21st century.
We must rise to the challenge of building that bridge to the 21st century. Tonight is a night for joy, not just for us here, but for all Americans. For the 53rd time in our history, our people have made their quiet and deliberate decision. They have come together with their powerful voice and expressed their will. Tonight we celebrate the miracle of America. Tomorrow we greet the dawn and begin our work anew. I am more grateful than I can say. You have given me an opportunity and a responsibility that comes to few people. I will do my best, and together we will build that bridge to the 21st century. Thank you, good night, and God bless America. Thank you.